Hello and welcome to In Conversation. It's great to have you both on. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join me on the podcast today. How's everything going?
Quite
Pretty
well.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Spring.
Well, talking of spring, where are you? Where are you both calling in from?
I'm just right outside of Washington, D.C. I am living in an area where there are at least 10 First Nation tribal lands, and so it's cherry blossom time, and it's quite beautiful. Finally, after a long winter.
Wonderful.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
It sounds like you deserve spring to have sprung. You must have had a pretty long winter down up there.
Indeed, especially from the cold political winds right from Washington coming our way.
This is going to be more of those than ever before, I think, this year. Unfortunately, I think we're all battening down the hatches, ready for an election year. But Susan, how about yourself? Where are you calling in from?
Well, I'm in London, England, and it's still a little bit brisk and chilly, but it's lovely. And fortunately, I'm situated now right by the Thames. I'm in between Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf, and I'm right on the river. I'm renting a flat from some friends, and it's absolutely beautiful because as I gaze to my left, I see the Thames, and it's one of the biggest width-wise of the river. That's where the situation is. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Yeah. So I have this constant array of boats and traffic on the water, which is wonderful.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Well, as always, I'm down in Tucson, Arizona, and we also it gets quite cold here over the winter, but yeah, we have some lovely spring weather and an abundance of wildlife. So it really does feel like spring, and we're getting ready for the super bloom. We've had quite a lot of rain. And yeah, fingers crossed, we're going to get a tremendous amount of blossoms, and all the flowers are starting to erupt. The cactuses are blossoming and all the rest of it. So a lovely time of year to be down here as well. But I've got arts on my mind, and I've also got folding on my mind. So, I wanted to kick things off with maybe a few questions about your forthcoming book, which will be published by Intellect later this year. Art Making as Embodied Inquiry, Entering the Fold. So I believe the book is designed more as a sort of source book or a generative platform for sourcing creativity, which is a really interesting description. And the book is designed to open ways to transform playful exploration into deeper intimacy within art making through exploring folds and folding. So in a nutshell, this book is about folding as a vibrant stimulus for transdisciplinary artistic research. Now that is fascinating, but what's that all about? Can you, in a nutshell, can you just tell us a little bit more about the book specifically and where this idea of folds and folding kind of comes in? Maybe Susan, you could start off by just explaining to us a little bit about what the book's all about.
Well, I was going to say let Glenna start because she's more of a wordsmith that kind of nails this. So I'm going to let you go first, Glenna, and then I'll add anything in if necessary.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks, James. Golly. Well, just to say, this is one of the more exciting publications I've ever done, if not the most exciting, and one of the best collaborations I've ever had in my whole life. So how to put it into a nutshell, what this book is all about. I like to think of folding, anything that has to do with enfolding and unfolding as a kind of substrate for all kinds of different materialities. The way in which our bodies, our somatic lived and living bodies, comes into play with making, whatever the making is, whether it's movement, fabric, photography, filming, music, textures, whatever. And basically it's how the human design is really this play between what is the body, what is it that we do with movement, with gesture, with connection, with living, that brings out creativity, aesthetics, and the artistic self. How is that possible? And so in the book, what we've done after almost 11 years now of collaboration is to really then be able to outline and describe the processes underlying this particular type of work. Because I think to just say, well, we can learn to make art, a specific type of art, using one type of approach or another type of approach. But this approach was meant to capture the broad scope of what could be. So it's really bringing, it's like what I would call a poesis. We like to think of coming into being. How do we come into being in an artistic realm? And what is it that we do when we make? And so for us, the folds and folding is like the basic movement repertoire of anything that we do. Everybody is folding and unfolding from the time you're a human embryo all the way through the lifespan, and certainly with everything we do in daily life and in artistic practice. It revolves those movements and the style, the way, the manner, the design with which we come into doing all of that. So that kind of gives you how we'd like to think of this as broad spectrum and transdisciplinary, is coming from that impulse.
Absolutely. It kind of started with the body, or started with more focus, shall we say, within dance, within the body. But through time, we realized how it could expand and how we wanted it to expand into any form of art, or any way of dealing with making art, and moreover to challenge those processes, because I think all of us who are in arts, and if you're, that somatic link is that kind of challenge of your default mode. So to really to understand what that default mode may be, and then how to challenge it, and the fold, almost that precipice, that threshold of slippage into another pathway, another mode, another way. Yeah, and acknowledging that, and embodying the knowledge of that.
Just one more thing, which is really important in the way that what we have contributed in the book, besides our description of the processes, but also what we've made sort of a highlight of, is that people who come into our workshops, the important thing is not that they know how to make art or that they're from any particular discipline, but that they simply have to hear what we are delivering across, whether it's hybrid, on site, or online. They are to hear and listen to the prompts that we give. So we have a very particular type of languaging that at first comes from a somatic basis of coming into the work, and then through whatever harvest we create from this moment of coming together, we get words and other things that then become scripts for later delivery. So I think rather than an outline, first we do this, then this, then this, our scaffold is one that is constantly morphing and changing and porous. Yeah.
Constantly evolving, and again tethered to other themes, or what we call plots. So it's not only the fold itself. The fold is kind of like the mechanism, but it could be about decay, it could be about smudge, it could be about drift, it could be about whatever, that we play with an idea, and we have no idea the outcome. We work co-creatively together with whoever we're with in the space and place of discovery.
Well, look, that makes a lot more sense now. So thank you both for that very informative explanation. And it also sounds fascinating as a process and a way of working. And your workshops sound fantastic as well. So it would be great to just hear a little bit more about them later on. Perhaps we can talk a bit more about your collaboration and the history of that collaboration. But let's just keep with fold for a minute. This idea of folding and folds. I guess, folds appear in every aspect of day-to-day life when you start thinking about it. But were there any specific inspirational moments or eureka moments around folds or folding in day-to-day life that kind of you took as inspiration for the project or for your way of thinking, a methodology, anything along those lines?
I'll jump in here.
Yeah.
I was in residence as an honorary fellow at Trinity Laban, where Susan was working about 13 years ago. And I was just felt that whatever practice I had, movement practice I was following, or somatic practice I was following, was getting rather stale. And I was looking for some new water, new infusion, new blood, whatever you would want to call it, something fluid that would just lead me rather than studying with another person or trying to learn a new technique. And I was reading the work of Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher who has written any number of books, but the one book that I happened to be reading was called The Fold, Leibniz and the Baroque. And in that book, the book, by the way, was quite popular with dancers in those days because, of course, Deleuze began to conceive of reality as this metaphysical continuum of life, whatever it was, and whatever level that we were looking at. Reality. So it was really changing the Newtonian concepts of reality. And one sentence jumped out at me that was the jumpstart for the fold. And to paraphrase, Deleuze said, the smallest unit of matter is not the point, but the fold. And as soon as I read that, I thought, aha. So
Bingo.
I started going just somatically and physically into the concept of folding and into feeling states of folding and going, oh, well, this is, you know, an infinite possibility that can go and become anywhere and anything. And that started it. And the first workshops, if you will, were just working with students at Trinity Laban. And we were really exploring kind of anatomical movement, particularly like embryonic movement, early, the early phases of development of the human body and this kind of thing. But it quickly changed into a more abstract understanding and work platform for what we were trying to deliver there by seeing that the fold could occur in anything. So then all of a sudden light and edge became the fold. Then it was, decay, as Susan was saying, or then it was palimpsest, looking at layering, through folding. And so we quickly moved into a much more aesthetic realms. We didn't stay in the anatomical at any point after that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And furthermore, when the pandemic hit, and we began this in 2013, and we kept playing with it, and through distance, we were already at distance, but we would meet, etc. But when the pandemic hit, that was wild because it kind of didn't force us. But I think I started with this thing, a class for a cause, that was initiated by the University of Arts in Stockholm, to do classes, and then you'd pay for the class and you give it to a particular cause. And I did it, and I wanted to try out the fold, and it worked. People were interested. So then Glenna and I really invested our time and energy on how to cultivate it into an online format. And it worked beautifully because, as Glenna stated earlier, it's about them listening to us. We don't have to see them, but what we're doing is we're kind of creating this to and fro languaging that develops a place and a space of play and of possibilities, and it blossomed, and that's where it really, really, really tipped into trans postdisciplinary work, and then we started getting a global participants coming in from different areas. Also, when I taught in Singapore at LaSalle College of the Arts, I was playing around a lot with the fold, with fashion, with design, with other disciplines, and coming from an embodied place and then expanding upon making. So it just gathered momentum and still is.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your collaboration next. It sounds like your relationship and this long-standing research project has blossomed as a result of that. So when did you first collaborate, and tell us a bit about that process? And did the objectives, when you initiated the collaboration, do they remain the same? Have they morphed, evolved over time?
Totally morphed and evolved. We began in 2012, and again, it was Glenna with her Fulbright at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, and she wanted a partner in crime for this case study she was interested in doing to separate kinesthetic from visual stimuli, and come in at any time, Glenna, if I'm falling apart. Kinesthetic and visual to stimulate creativity. And she wanted a person who was really stimulated by the visual, which I was, because Glenna is an extraordinaire when it comes to kinesthetic and somatic. And I have a background and understanding, and it's constantly growing, of somatic work. But moreover, I've had a love ever since I was a child of visual arts. And especially I work in a whole host of different medias, but particularly with photography and film. But that's where it first grew. And we really enjoyed working with each other and learning from each other. So once the Fold started kicking off in 2013, we had our different roles, but yet they weren't different. They started kind of collapsing into one another. And that's how it grew. And it's constantly growing with that, because I think we're tapping and teasing into each other's, shall we say, expertise. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky to meet Susan. It was quite serendipitous. I mean, at Laban, I didn't know really who or where to go to find someone to work with, to be in a research capacity. And at that time, we were asked to do, quote, research, actually apply for an IRB, in order to do research. When I saw Susan teach, I said, aha, this is the person that I need to work with. And yes, the truth be told, that Susan has an just extraordinary visual eye, and was able to bring the visual into focus in ways that I could not have conceived of. And I was lodged much more in the experiential body. And so in a very deep way, the inner body and so forth. So from a somatic point of view, and from the collaboration, what we've discovered is that they're, at once they can be parsed out and separated and highlighted, but they can also merge. And the merging is one of the things that's made our languaging so interesting for people who come on board, because we bring in maybe a visual, a word or image, a spoken word or image, and I could bring in a somatic one, and somehow they collude and collide and collapse and then come into a whole other play with one another in ways that then opens up portals for people in terms of letting them release from their habitual ways of thinking. And that's been a real plus in the way that we've been able to work. And that's one of our aims, is to allow people to just engage with the unknown and to let go of trying to do art, trying to make art, and to just allow themselves to be free of all of that.
Okay. Well, then when we're talking about audience, who do you think this book's sort of most intended for? Who would you anticipate using it? Is it more for teachers, or for practitioners, or for all of the above? Do you think this has really wide appeal? Okay.
Definitely all of the above. Yeah, because I think teachers can use it, but I think practitioners, and we've had practitioners with us from all different realms, and it's quite extraordinary what they absorb and how they absorb it. And I mean, we learn from them continuously, because I mean, new words will arise, new concepts will arise, new possibilities will arise. I did one, a very small one here in London, and it was at a small art gallery, and I had all visual artists, and one girl in particular who just graduated with her master's from the Royal College of Art. She just went boom, and she comes mainly from photography and film, and was just fascinated by it. And she said she definitely needed it at this moment in time, because she was just finishing up her dissertation, and it just freed her for a moment to allow her to consider other ways in. Yeah.
And just to say quickly, we've also had people coming in with various forms of challenges. They might have Parkinson's, for example, or they might have a speech impediment, or they never studied dance or movement, and they're, the whole thought of it makes them nervous. And we also, of course, had multiple languages. So we may begin in English, but we can also draw in these different languages when it's appropriate, and went to one of the scripts, and just make sure that whoever is on board, their voice is heard. And, this is one of the ways that I think it has really crossed the disciplines and become post-disciplinary and post-humanist in the way that we've tried to look at it all.
Excellent. And solving those accessibility issues, it sounds like that was quite an important part of this research project for you both. And just, working out how people would need to use this and adapting to challenges and changes seems to have been a big part of how the research project has developed up to this point, where we're now ready to publish the book. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. we're excited.
Well, let's just briefly talk a little bit maybe about the book structure as well, because it's quite, a very fascinating and quite complicated sort of subject to focus on. And it sounds like when you throw in all these other challenges and the way that you've needed to adapt throughout the process, I'm sure that's thrown a few interesting spanners into the works, perhaps, and things. But how did you settle on what made it into the book and the sort of structure and the chapters and the how you focus the project? Just tell us a little bit about that. That'd be wonderful.
I think I better lie. This took quite a bit of wordsmithing, I have to tell you. Every single chapter had to be created out of nothing. I mean, and out of the practice. And so, we might have had hundreds of pages of notes from practicing, but none of them could be translated into a book that someone would be able to understand. Mm-hmm. So we had to begin to think about what about our processes was unique. So we had something called processes, a chapter called processes, but we also called it wayfinding. We had to find another word that sort of expanded the idea of processes. We had to put in something about pedagogy, but we had to find another word that was going to sort of explode what that meant. So we called it scaffold with a slash between F and the other F. So we had scaffold and use diacritical marks and hyphens and other ways of making a chapter visible to a reader in a way that they would see, oh, I see. It does follow along a certain progression, shall we say, but we had a chapter on language, and we had a chapter on co-creation. We had a chapter on using a smartphone in a workshop, in order to capture, folding that way. We had different ways of coming in at it that were both at once maybe a practical vignette or a glimpse of some kind of practice, but at the same time could have logic as a way of structuring a somatic and artistic art making process.
So it also was constantly juggling this idea of the work shopping, and that's, we use that ing, that kind of continuum, that we're doing it live, hybrid, and online. So it was constantly juggling those three, which are very different but also similar. And we were learning a lot online, even by the use of the chat. That when we come live, we were going, well, how can we have this live chat going on? But live, and because this accumulation or generative mode of accumulating words that were rising up in the moment. It was wild. So many things were feeding off of each other. And I may add, going back to the visual, because we use the online, a lot of times I would form a PowerPoint that was dealing with the plot or the theme and sourcing other artists, be that in architecture, visual art. Also, we would source theory, phenomenology, a whole host of different things dealing with that theme, and plot it in there to give stimuli. And so within the book, it was crucial to nest a continuum of images. And the images came from both of us, things that we shot, that we made, that whatever, and also all of our participants. I chose a couple of visual artists, really heavy hitters, that were constantly repeating themselves within art, such as, I don't know if you know Francesca Woodman, photographer, who unfortunately died at a very young age, who's extraordinary. And her use of the camera and photography repeated a lot. Wolfgang Tillmans, another one, Lydia Clark, people like that, who their practice lended itself to what we were working with, and we'd use it as a kind of stimuli. Yeah, so they appeared in the book.
Well, yes, they not only appeared, it just shows that the book wouldn't be what it is without the images. And in fact, getting through peer review, we were quite amused because we thought, gee, what are people going to think, about this book? And one of the reviewers said, not only was this sort of an inkling of a new era of somatic writing, which of course but she said it would not be the same without the visual. The images have to be there, and they are the things that really give clarity to the words. And so this was just essential. So many of these came from Susan. In fact, most of them from her work and from some of the participants as well, as she said.
I was very challenged to try to meet the written text with the image, and also the alternative text, just this kind of wovenness that it was just another way of speaking. That I was really interested in that, that it just had this continuum, that it wasn't, okay, now it's a picture divine. No, that it was just the image becomes a word, the word becomes an image. Yeah.
Right. Oh, well, thank you. That's fascinating. And I think the images are very much an integral part of the book, that's for sure. But while we're talking about visual language, I did want to ask you a little bit about the cover as well, because it's a really potent, powerful cover design overall, and a moving image, but quite ethereal as well. So I think, it's one of those covers that's probably going to have a few detractors, but also it's so impactful and powerful. I think it's the right way to go. But yeah, we'll undoubtedly flash the cover image up on screen at the end of the podcast, so people can check it out. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the cover and how you ended up going that way.
It's a photograph that I took in Singapore. There was a colleague of mine by the name of Theo Klinkard, and he made a piece. I'm shooting all the time. I shoot on a continual basis, and I'm really into a thing that's called that I call dissolving the indexical, which is basically the index, which is the identity of the photo, the image. I like to blur it like crazy, and in all different means. So it adds more of a kind of associative materiality. It expands the image. And the dancers, they were wearing this kind of, it's a kind of material. What was it? Gauze? It was not gauze. Oh, geez. Anyway, it was transparent, but kind of luminous. And it just fitted over their body. So I went in really, really tight into all of them. And I had about 200 images. In fact, from those images, I composed a film that was playing outside. I deconstructed the work for this particular showing that they had at La Salle. And one of the constants was the film. So there was these performative areas, and I believe the virtual or the photographic image is a performative element. Anyway, I went through all those images, and I kind of plucked out ones that I thought resonated with seeing the body, but not seeing the body. I wanted something that was obscure, that was abstract, and yet was very folded. And it was very folded. So as you look at it, you're thinking, is this a terrain? Is this a fabric? Is this the inside of a body? What is it? And I turned it from color into black and white. And then I changed the tonality a wee bit about it. And then we were very desiring that the text itself folded. So we asked intellect, can you create this kind of current of the text so that it's still readable, but at the same time is prevalent. And we were interested to fold it from front back. So it's the image itself is just not the front cover of the book, but it folds to the back cover.
Yeah.
If we wanted to add more of that kind of essence of folding, but we're working with the two-dimensional image, but trying to imply this three-dimensionality. And yeah, so I hope it tapped into that.
Well, sometimes necessity is the greatest creator of creativity, right? And that's definitely the case in this. You've certainly managed to capture that, I think, in a 2D image. So yeah, congratulations. I think the cover is fantastic, and looking forward to seeing it on actual shelves, which would be wonderful. I think this book will have a life on the bookshelves in many different types of places as well. Obviously, it's got a clear course adoption potential, and we'd expect this to be available through various different libraries and being taught at different institutions. But I'm really glad that you have kind of designed the cover in such a way that it will really capture people's attention if they see it on the shelves in a bookstore or at a conference or an event, something like that. So look forward to seeing how people react to it.
I mean, I would be blown away. I was just at Whitechapel Gallery the past weekend, to be able to see that book at Whitechapel, or to be able to see it at the Tate, or I'm talking from a London scape. That's ultimately, if it could hit there, that would blow my mind away. Yeah.
Well, if Whitechapel are listening, send us a call. But yeah, no, watch this space. That we'll certainly be able to make the book available in various different locations and through different retail outlets, and we'll be able to send out a bit more information around that just around the time of publication. I should also say that the book is scheduled for publication December 2024, but we are, already pre-orders are available. So if people are interested in finding out more, they can go to www.intellectbooks.com and take a look at the book, take a look at this page, have a look at the cover, read all around the topic. And then, of course, if you're interested, you can go ahead and purchase a pre-order of the book. We appreciate, of course, that support as well. And we'd expect this book to be available through many different institutional libraries around the world as well, and can't wait to see what kind of impact it has. So thank you very much for sharing all that insight and information around the book. I'm particularly fascinated by this one and really looking forward to spending a bit more time with it. I've had a cursory look through and read bits and pieces, but looking forward to perhaps sitting down with the book and having a really thorough read through. But before we end today, I did have a few QuickTime questions for you, a little bit more lighthearted. So if you don't mind, I've got a couple, and maybe if you could both answer each question, and I will start with Susan, and then Glenna, if you come in after Susan, that'd be wonderful. So the first question I have for you today is, what artists or practitioners have most influenced you and why?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many, but I think I'm going to hit ones that are visual artists, and I'm going to hit visual artists who, frankly, encompass a performative element. And I'll name all three, and they're all women: Anna Mendieta, Lydia Clark, and Eva Hesse. They use performance as a part of their working with a whole host of different mediums and materials. I wrote this down. In fact, the fragility of the engagement becomes an element in their making, and how the process is prioritized over the product. I mean, even Ava's work, she adored the sense that it was fragile, that it couldn't stand, that the making, it was about the making. And I think, again, this tethers a lot to what the book is all about. Yeah.
Thanks, Susan. Fascinating. And two new artists there for me as well. So I'll be checking that out, and I'm sure listeners to the podcast will also do the same. Glenna, how about yourself? Any artists?
All right. This is really a tough one. I don't have a performance career like Susan. I was really a bridge between art and science, and between movement and somatic arts and dance and various forms of neuroscience and so forth. And so it's a little hard to say one person, one thing. I'm actually, if I were to, say what, I saw my first dance concert around age 8. It was Merce Cunningham. And I have to say, it has never left me, just to see the amazement of what my mother also was a dancer. She studied with Ruth St. Denis and Hanya Holmes. So I grew up in a dancing world, but it was not something that I felt I had the talent or wherewithal to do as a profession. But nonetheless, I really have to look at nature. That nature is really the most beautiful artist and creator, and that just the simplest seed becomes a flower is, to me, something that really speaks to the fold and speaks to my life in itself unfolding, and how it's taken decades for me to come from a sort of dormancy and avoidance, actually, of the academy, which I found rather oppressive when I tried to study any art, into feeling free enough and improvisational enough, and finding wonderful colleagues like Susan to work with, in order that this was, that we co-create, and that's really one of the best ways that these things can flourish. And so as far as artistic, like an artist themselves. Of course, I love Mark Rothko. When he says something as simple as silence is so accurate, I go, yes, this is for me. How can we, and whatever people do to interpret his work, it's never it. I love that about who he is. I also was very struck by Lowry Burgess's work, where he he's an artist who went around the world quite at least 2 decades ago, collected sap from all the sacred trees and water from all the sacred rivers and sent it up into space in the Apollo spacecraft. So I thought, all right, that's something that I think is very transcendent. And so for me, it just sort of lives on a spiritual realm. Yeah.
That's also new to me. That's very cool and fascinating. I'm gaining a lot of knowledge from this podcast, so thank you guys. I appreciate
No
that.
problem.
Really fascinating. I love the nature idea as well. That is a really nice answer.
Yeah.
Well, I want to continue by asking a bit more about influence, and I was wondering, which living person do you most admire and why?
That one's such a tough one. I mean, for me, truthfully, I mean, at this moment, I've got to say, and you're going to laugh, that it's Glenna. I mean, seriously, she is so generous with her knowledge, with her being, with her person. It's crazy. Unwavering support. She's got an amazing sense of humor. She's always growing and interested. And I don't think for me, it's been a really difficult past year since the pandemic. And without her, I don't know how I would have sustained. And working on this book and this collaboration has just been, has just been phenomenal for myself. So I'd have to say her.
I'm afraid it's going to sound like a mirror image. I mean, when I thought about that, Susan, that's the person who's influenced me. But, it just takes so long sometimes to mature in a thing. And, the fold just started from sort of, an impulse. I mean, it really wasn't anything more than a spark. And, so it's taken all this time, and we've been through all kinds of incarnations vis-a-vis one another, the work, how it's come together, how it's grown. And so, I mean, there are other people in life who certainly influence me, and I can just diverge a little bit about that just to say, I've spent the last 25 years doing some criminal justice work with a person who's serving a life sentence. And I think communicating with someone behind bars who lives in a 6x10 space and uses it creatively has shown me that when you put constraint on something, it really offers an option to find more creativity. So he lives with constraint and restraint, but in our work, we don't have so much a restraint imposed from the outside, but we do have constraint, and we do put that on our work. And so Susan and I, in our work together, we've learned how those different things work, that we have a mesh that offers some porous avenues, but it also sort of brings us into relationship, into a matrix that we can work with.
Well, that, again, another fascinating answer. Thank you very much. I wanted to take it back a little bit now, though, and talking about your work, and ask, can you recall what your first published piece of work was, whether it be an article, an essay, or a chapter, or a monograph? What was it?
Yep, I've got it. I mean, my very first one was a paper. It was when I was at Laban. At that time, it was Laban, and my background in dance, I danced for the second company of Martha Graham in the 80s. So it was called the Ensemble. And we had this module that was called Historical Project, of which I did various recreations of Martha's work. But one year in particular, I did Primitive Mysteries, which is a piece of Martha's from 1931. And I danced it when I was in the 80s. We performed at the New York State Theater. And it was a paper about the recreation because we received from Sandra Alberkins, who's from part of the Notation Bureau in New York, we received the notational score, which was done by Yuriko Kikuchi in Texas. And we were supposed to test it, but in order to test it, you have to follow the score completely. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, but I want to use it. So I had two notators working with me. I had two cast of dancers. They were BA2s, second year undergraduates. I had about 3 different films and then my own embodied practice. And in that publication for the Dance Notation Bureau, I spoke about that. And I loved how that working with the notational score provided me more with questions than with answers. And my agency in recreation was a complete collaboration, utilizing the dancers, the readers, the notators, the various films, and definitely my embodied memory. And I remember watching it on stage and I wept. It was the first time I'd ever seen, it was the first and only time I've ever seen the work. The only time was in the UK. And yeah, that's a very special one. And luckily I have this very small paper that was done for the Dance Notational Bureau and a DMB. And yeah, it was on that creation.
Thanks for
Or I
sharing.
should say recreation. Yeah.
I want to see that paper.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Susan and I have gone on to actually publish a few things ourselves, but the first thing, you know, I mean, I've done any number of scientific papers and trying to bridge the dance science, and I've done some things like that throughout the decades. But my first book was by Intellect Press, and it was Body and Mind in Motion, Dance and Neuroscience and Conversation, which was really a book that looked at the sort of collaboration or, you know, coordination of somatics, neuroscience, and dance, how those three subjects really began to come and meet at the table, which was itself a long journey from the 70s when I first got involved in somatics and onward through several decades of critiques and so forth. So that it's a book that I feel was a nod to the Academy in a big way. At the same time, it was a book that was greatly hard to write. It was so hard to write and pulled a lot out of me. And I sort of feel like now that we've done this other book, which is much more of an artistic tilt to it, that I was a lot freer in this last book that I've written. I mean, there's no comparison to how I wrote this first book on Body and Mind in Motion, which was highly academic, and how I've left that behind and ventured into new ground. So I can only hope that our newest publications after this one will even be more amazingly inspiring. And we certainly have some ideas about how that might look.
Thank you very much. Well, that's fortuitous. I didn't realize that was going to be your first publication, but that's worked out quite nicely as a little bit of a marketing pitch. And it's a fine book, I have to say. If this one has just as much impact as that, and if it's still getting picked up off the shelves as Body and Mind in Motion is, then I'll be very happy. So congratulations to you on those publications, on all that have come since, and very much looking forward to again seeing what the reaction to this forthcoming one's going to be. Well, you both worked with Intellect a little bit then, so could I ask, is there anything that you particularly love about that collaboration with Intellect or working with Intellect?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's my first time, truthfully, and for me, I'm just so excited because I feel you listen, which is so beautiful. There's an artistic listening that happens that I've just been thrilled about, because to allow agency for the authors in their choice making. Because I was scared. I was quite nervous, saying, "Oh dear, I'm going to present an idea." We'll present an idea, and they'll go like, "No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that," which is fine too. Limitations I'm fine with, and I'll work around those. But instead, there was a lot of leeway. There was like, oh, and as long as we were able to communicate why we needed it, why it was necessary, why it had to be this way, they allowed us to go with it, and we found different ways to merge, to play, to improvise. Yeah.
Oh, that makes me happy. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much, Susan. Glenna, anything to add to that?
Yes. What I loved is the ability to bend house rules just enough to handle edgy new ground. It's kind of like encapsulating what Susan was just saying, that, you know, we're not seen as a product. I really think we're seen as people, and as artists, and as, you know, offering something that goes beyond, you know, what kind of money that it might make from this publication. And that what they really want is a press that just represents this incredibly wide vast spectrum of artistic work,
True.
and across the globe, really. But I always felt that, like Susan said, there was always, you'd bring up something and you'd wonder, oh my God, maybe this is just way too much. No, no, they're not going to accept this. And sure enough, they would end up accepting,
Yeah,
So
it was wild.
brilliant. I know that they have their own house font and their own house referencing ways of doing things, and we just bent them up, down, and sideways, and they said yes. So what can I say? Couldn't have been a better liaison.
Well, when there's a business case or a creative reason behind things that's going to improve accessibility, discoverability, the way that people interact with the work, the research, then yeah, we're definitely able to be a bit more flexible and to consider different ways of looking at things. That's for sure. But I'm glad to hear you both had a good experience anyway. And I just wanted to ask you finally, what are you both working on currently? Anything in the pipeline?
Well, I mean, I did a work just recently in December at, I don't know if you know, the Tetley in Leeds, unfortunately is folded now. Speaking of the word folded. Unfortunately they had to move out. They're building apartments there instead of a cultural enterprise. But the gallery is still functioning in a more nomadic realm. But while it was still in the building, which is this beautiful building in Leeds. So I worked with 13 dancers in this realm, and basically this work that is an extension of works that have been going on called Fold, Fall, Nest. So it's looking at the three words and how they kind of collapse with each other. The way I tend to work is with the live body, absence and presence of the performing body, with sound, with text, with images, be that a photographic image, be that a virtual image, in kind of a durational installational scape. And I did a work on that. And I'm still interested in deconstructing, reconstructing it in various different modalities. I'm also interested in working and writing it as a kind of score script to enable it to be, say, for instance, I can send it to Hong Kong and they can do it. I'll give different constraints or different specificities of limitations, but at the same time, it gives them agency to be able to do it within like a gallery setting or a particular kind of site-specific setting. I'm very interested in that. And again, it comes from the folding practice. I talk a wee bit about it in the book in certain places for me personally, that the fold enters in maybe as an initial stimuli. Maybe it's something that helps generate particular elements within a working process, or maybe it's reflective afterwards, or maybe it's all three. And within that kind of creative work that I'm doing right now, yeah, it's hitting all three in different times and places. But I'm dying to come back into it. It's just a matter of finding a particular space, place, and yeah, how.
Oh, thank you, Susan. That sounds fascinating as well. And Glenna, how about yourself? You are working on a thing at the moment.
Well, I'm of two minds. I would, of course, love to see the fold evolve into a viable business for both of us, really. That, and maybe the book will help that. I don't know. It'd be great if it did. Personally, at this point in my life, I'd like to get off the grid for about half a year. I don't feel I'm doing anything about me at the moment or my life, but I'd like to listen to a different timbre for a change. Really get off social media, allow myself to just be in a different lifestyle and form. And whatever would emerge from that, well, it's yet to be seen. But I have lived a very purposeful and directed life, and feel that it's well past time to take a sabbatical. So if I can, I'd like to be able to do that. And I will have a chance this summer to do some teaching in Europe. I've got a dance and the aging grant in Austria and Italy, and also some Alexander technique work in Slovenia. So I got a couple of workshops and things to do this summer, and maybe just being abroad will be enough. And I'll get to see Susan during this time as well, and meet her in London, and we can see what that cooks up. So I'd like to just not lead for a while, but simply just allow myself to just bathe in whatever the different things that are happening around, and go to a place of deeper listening for a while.
Oh, yeah, that sounds wonderful, and sounds well deserved as well, to be honest. Well, look, on that note, thank you both very much for your time today. It's been wonderful having you on the In Conversation podcast, and we're very much looking forward to publishing the book and to having it out there in the world. So I would just like to draw everyone's attention to that as well, and I would just like everyone to spend some time just doing a little search for Glenna and Susan, to look at some of the work that they've been involved in over the years, some of their practice, and some of their work that they're teaching, and some of the course the research that has led to the creation of this art making project as well. So thank you both for your time today, and any final questions or final thoughts?
Not at all.
I think you've
Thank you
covered
so
it.
much, James. Yeah.
Thanks so much.